This is Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
The station that talks the net. KGRA Radio.
Hello, I'm Katie, and you're listening to my main man, Jimmy Church, on jimmychurchradio.com.
Hi, this is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black. Today, everybody, the Fadernauts and planet Earth is vaping, and I'm very proud to announce our very own e-juice. When we were approached by City of Angels Vapor about Fade to Black e-juice, I wanted to make sure that it was the very best, and that the flavors were something that I could create myself, and we did just that. Introducing Fade to Black Fader Loops. This will take you right back to Saturday morning cartoons and your favorite bowl of fruity, loopy cereal. Just click on the banner or go to www.coavapor.com. Enter the promo code Jimmy for the Fader Not special. That's www.coavapor.com. Go back, Lee Tappy.
Hi, this is Ray Hobbs here, repping the planet, and you're listening to my good friend, Jimmy Church, Fade to Black, on the Game Changer Network and the KGRA digital broadcast station.
Imagine no longer being tied down to your computer, but having the freedom to take live talk radio with you anywhere you go. TalkStream Live introduces our first ever iPhone application. The talk shows you follow now follow you. And your iPhone is now the fastest and easiest way to stay connected to the best talk radio on the internet. Let TalkStream Live transform the way you listen to radio. Listen to live talk shows 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Mobile talk radio from TalkStream Live. Now available in the iTunes App Store.
This is Toby Kebbell. You're listening to JimmyChurchRadio.com. Don't hurt me, Jimmy. I'm only little.
Hey, I'm Adrian Grenier.
And this is Ari Gold.
We're the Honey Brothers. We are of the Honey Brothers. Hey, I'm Adrian Grenier.
And I'm Ari Gold.
We're the Honey Brothers.
And you're listening to Jimmy Church.
The Revolution.
Attention, all Fadernauts. Studio Dome has a special deal on their SD1 Bluetooth speaker. Just go to jimmychurchradio.com, click on their banner, enter the promo code Jimmy, and you get $40 off and free shipping on the SD1. It's voice activated, comes with a USB antenna, cables, and a carry bag. Never listen to your phone, tablet, or laptop speakers ever again. It's the only way to listen to Fade to Black. That's jimmychurchradio.com, Studio Dome banner, promo code Jimmy. Go back, Lee Tappy.
This is Micah Hanks of the Gralien Report, and you're listening to Jimmy Church on Fade to Black, across the globe on the Game Changer Radio Network and the one and only KGRA Radio, The Planet.
All right, welcome back. Fade to Black. Bespoke radio for the masses on the Game Changer Network and KGRA The Planet. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Follow us on Twitter at JChurchRadio. You can also email Jimmy at jimmychurchradio.com. Today, the Pope arrived in the United States. Tomorrow, Leo Zagami is going to be here live from Rome, and we'll be discussing that. But what is the Pope's agenda here? What is he doing? Tomorrow, September 23rd, the end of the world. Conspiracies are all over the place about what's going on this week. And tonight, we're going to discuss that and all of the other conspiracies that are going on around with us. What is conspiracy theory? Andy Thomas is one of the world's leading authors and lecturers on unexplained mysteries and global cover-ups. He has written many books, including The Truth Agenda. He's also written Conspiracies and the Crop Circle Guide, Vital Signs. And he lectures in many different countries, and he has made numerous radio and television appearances around the world, including programs for the BBC, NBC, the History Channel, the National Geographic Channel, and he regularly writes for Nexus Magazine. The post-2012 prophecy situation and the new era, 9/11 information updates, it's all going to happen right now. I would like to welcome to Fade to Black for the first time, Andy Thomas, live from the UK. Andy, I know it's very early in the morning, but welcome to the program. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. No, very pleased to be here.
Andy, I start off, welcome to the program, but I start off with a disclaimer with anybody that has been with us for the very first time. And this is the disclaimer. It's just you and I sitting on my couch, talking as friends. We're going to start as friends. We're going to go where we go with the conversation, and we're going to end as friends. That's my disclaimer. Are you ready?
All good.
Yeah, exactly. Andy, with conspiracies, and we're going to get into the definition of a conspiracy in just a second and what that is, but for you, there was an epiphany in your life somewhere that made you take this left or right-hand turn and head down this road of disclosure and conspiracy. What happened?
Well, I mean, I came into it really by accident, and the thing that drew me in is much more, at first, the world of unexplained mysteries, UFOs, crop circles, that kind of world. And what became clear to me very quickly was that, in fact, it was absolutely being hugely misrepresented in the press. Now, that's where it began. And the realization that even like just the arguments over fairly light stuff, like crop circles, that was so obviously being engineered in the media to make people think there was nothing to know. And it was something I just had a personal interest in. I quickly realized that the direct lies, and they were lies, that were being told in the media about things like that were very out there. It was very, very obvious. And of course, when you start down that road and then you meet other people researching other things, that's where you realize that absolutely nothing is being represented correctly in the media. So it began kind of from that light end of the spectrum for me, and then getting drawn more and more in to realize that, everything we are presented with on the television, on the radio, and that is just a facade. It is one version of reality that doesn't necessarily bear any relation to everybody else's reality. And once you start down that road, of course, you begin to question everything, and then meet other people who are investigating, shall we say, deeper, darker areas. And before I knew it, I found myself drawn in, and just there I was. I now was at that point where I was willing to sort of start from a blank sheet and reevaluate everything I believed about the world, and realizing that the mainstream was not necessarily ever going to go with that. But hey, what the hell? I was going to go down that road anyway.
Well, I have issues, and I talk about it all the time on the show, about mass media news, take the story, flip it over 180 degrees, no matter what channel you're watching, and you're closer to the truth than what's being presented. But I have also said, Andy, a lot, that I go to BBC World News because I feel it's a little bit closer to reality. Am I wrong about the BBC as well?
Fair to say that I think you are. I mean, let me put it like this. Yes, the BBC is much, much better than many news sources, and at least it's not Rupert Murdoch's bunch. But I'm afraid that, there is a lot of misinformation there too. I mean, what I think is perhaps not understood around the world, which is clearer when you live here in England, is that the BBC is under great attack at the moment. I mean, our government, if it could, would basically destroy the BBC as it currently stands because of people like Rupert Murdoch, who has enormous influence on governments, who would more than happily see the BBC go because then he wouldn't have the competition. So as a result, what's happened is the BBC is desperate not to lose what we call the license fee, because everybody has to pay a license fee to have any kind of television at all, which funds this public service, which is the BBC. So what's happened, certainly since the Dr. David Kelly affair back in the Iraq War of 2003, the BBC very famously ran a story saying that the war in Iraq Iraq was phony, that, there were no weapons of mass destruction. Now, this is very famous, but what is not quite so understood is that it was the BBC that broke that story over here. They had spoken to Dr. David Kelly, and the government came down on the BBC like a ton of bricks and basically said, if you don't start towing the line, you are going to be basically finished. And ever since then, I'm afraid the BBC has been far less willing to challenge, any kind of authoritative dogma, and much more willing to run with what are obviously propaganda stories. So I'm afraid the BBC has absolutely been watered down hugely in recent years, and certainly with stuff like the war in Syria and a lot of Middle East stuff, it's just running one side of the story only, and it's usually the story the government wants you to read. So I'm afraid that, yes, whilst I think it is better than many choices, you still have to read between the lines, and you've still got to keep your own brain in your head, because it is not giving you the whole story.
With speaking of conspiracy and the UK and the Iraq War and the United States, and this is the definition of conspiracy for sure, when Tony Blair was waving that famous letter, right, publicly about Iraq purchasing nuclear materials, and they had the proof, and now they wanted to get the UK involved, and he waved that letter around. Was that a conspiracy? Was he conspiring with the United States?
I mean, these are aspects that have never been clear, because, it's a strange thing. In some countries of the world, Tony Blair is looked on very well. I have to tell you, over here, the majority of people see him as the most despicable human being that ever lived. Right. I'm afraid. If you do admire him, he is not liked here. And the general view is either he knew it was a lie, or at the very best, he was just willing to go with anything that America wanted to do for the reflected glory. And he just went along with what was going on and wanted to be on board to make sure that if it went well, he would come out of it well with everybody else. But of course, it didn't quite work like that. So obviously, yes, a lot of people think he knew very well that the whole story of weapons of mass destruction was not true. But whichever way you look at it, it's not good, and he should not have gone into it in the way he did. And as I say, he has made no friends at all over here, even in the mainstream.
Here is the definition of conspiracy according to dictionary.com. Okay, and it is an evil, unlawful, treacherous, or plan formulated in secret by two or more persons, a plot, a combination of persons for a secret, unlawful, or evil purpose. And they're quoting here, he joined the conspiracy to overthrow the government. Or in law, an agreement by two or more persons to commit a crime, fraud, or other wrongful act. How is that different from conspiracy theory? And what is your definition?
I mean, I should say now that I don't actually have an issue with the term conspiracy theory, because obviously it's something I'm always described as, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. And after a while, I started to think about this and thought, well, I suppose, although clearly there are some proven conspiracies in the world, sometimes we don't know the whole story, and we need to fill in the gaps with some theorizing. Now, my argument there is, what is wrong with that? And the fact that the term conspiracy theorist has become a dirty word used against us is sort of clever on the authorities' part, but also quite dumb, because if you stand back and look at it, you think, yeah, actually, what's wrong with that? Everything until proven 100% is to some degree theory, and that's equally true in the world of modern science. So yeah, hey, there is a bit of theory going into it, but also there are lots of conspiracies which are absolutely proven. It's there, it's obvious when you look back through history, which is something that I like to write and speak about a lot, looking at the pattern of conspiracies throughout history. You realize, well, this is just the way the world works. It shouldn't be, but it is. To say that anybody that believes in conspiracies or theories about them is stupid or misguided subsided, I'm afraid is a ridiculous statement, because it is part of our world and we need to accept it and investigate and theorize where necessary. So I don't have an issue with that term.
When have you had a UFO sighting yourself? Have you seen something strange in the sky that you couldn't explain?
I certainly have. There's been a number of occasions over the years, but there's two in particular. So despite the bad press they get, and despite all the debunking, and despite however many are man-made, there are some crop circles that I do not believe can be all explained away as the work of people. And I can only tell you this, that back in 1993 in particular, I and a group of colleagues, we witnessed the white balls of light that many people have seen and filmed in and around crop circles, flying over the fields that had crop circles in them. And in the same area, but looking back up the other way on a separate night, there were three of us that witnessed these huge black shapes. What can I say? They were huge black shapes, not triangles, not solid. It was almost more something on the edge of reality. And they were flickering, moving from side to side very, very quickly. It was one of the strangest, most eeriest things I've ever seen. And certainly, I know from other people that I've spoken to who've been in that area of Wiltshire in England, it is not uncommon for very strange things to be seen. And there have been one or two other things I've seen over the years, but they were the two key times. So I do know that when people describe this kind of phenomena, there is clearly something going on.
And did that help change your support your presentation on conspiracy when it comes to UFOs and ufology? You know what you've seen, but you know what the government's official stance is. And does it strengthen your position?
Well, not only do I know what I've seen, I also get to meet an awful lot of people who describe to me what they've seen. Now, I'm quite lucky. I give lectures to many truth groups, to many, conspiracy groups, but also I get to give lectures to mainstream groups. And obviously you have to be a little bit more careful in the way you present the material. But it means I get to meet a lot of people, professionals in the military, in just business, corporations. And of course, what I'm trying to do is fly under the radar. I'm trying to wake them up to what's going on in their world. But the amount of pilots, the amount of commercial airline pilots or military pilots who I have spoken to over the years, who've quietly come up to me after lectures, who have told me, yes, there is a UFO phenomenon, and the pictures you've just shown, I've seen exactly that. I've had it happen to me now so many times that you realize that there is the hugest cover-up around the area of UFOs, because professionals know very well that there is a phenomenon. Now, that doesn't tell you what these things are, whether they are extraterrestrial or military or both or a hybrid. We don't know that. But there is something very strange that flies in our skies. And I have this confirmed to me. I would say probably at least once or twice a month, surprising people will come up and tell me a tale of a UFO that they've seen. So there is a phenomenon, and it seems to me incredibly stupid that the world is still in denial about this. But of course, that would serve the interest of the authorities for us to think that it was stupid and not worth discussing, because of course that's a great way to shut down conversations.
Is it easier to speak and present these ideas of conspiracy in the UK than it is in other areas around the world? And I ask that because, you guys are an old country, you've been around forever, but two, historically in literature and in fiction, nonfiction, plays, movies, you guys love a good conspiracy. And it's something that you guys do. Are you guys more open to it? Is it easier for you over there?
I'm not sure that it is. I've spoken in many countries around the world, including North America, but it depends where you go. I've spoken in Brazil and Peru. Now, there's enormous openness down there to stuff like UFOs. So, in fact, they're more attuned to it than we are here in England. I'll tell you what I find over here is that people are receptive to evidence. We tend, as the British tend to be quite cynical about things, and that can be quite healthy, but it can be slightly irritating as well. Right. But when evidence is presented, people are very good at changing their minds or saying, okay, I've heard another side to this. I'm now going to be more open-minded. And from that point of view, I think we are perhaps less dogmatic than some other countries where people have absolutely made up their minds, and that's that. And it doesn't matter what you show them, they're going to believe what they believe. People good here, they might start off skeptical, but if you can make a reasonable, rational presentation of evidence to them, they will come around. And I'm always impressed by how many people that, sometimes get dismissed as, sheeple or words like that, which
Right.
I don't think is a fair term. I'm very surprised that when you can expose them to the evidence, how quickly minds will change. And that's part of what we're dealing with here, which is people just need the information and it needs to get to them. So yes, maybe they're sheeple purely because the info never reaches them, but that doesn't mean they're stupid. And when you get that information to them, it's very encouraging that they will open up, certainly over here.
One of my greatest pleasures that I have is the original Prisoner, the TV series. Love it, right?
Yep.
How close to that was it to reality?
Well, I mean, it's a really interesting thing because The Prisoner, for anybody listening that doesn't know, I think it was around 1967, 68.
Right.
It was very ahead of its time. I mean, Patrick McGoohan, who wrote it, had very strong feelings about the way the world was run. And it is, of course, an allegory about the way the world really is. A guy's living in a prison. It's a bit like The Matrix. It seems on the surface quite a beautiful place to be, but of course, underneath it's run by control, surveillance, subterfuge, and he continually tries to rail against this. So it was very ahead of its time, and I think that series did wake up many people to realize, maybe this is in fact the way the world runs. So I think Patrick McGoohan did a lot of people a favor with that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And it's one of those things where you watch it and you go, okay, great, fun to watch. Yeah, this is great. But I just wonder, that's what that did. And you're absolutely right. It opened up people's eyes all the way around. And again, back to my reference earlier, Andy, which is you guys love a good conspiracy. And the way that it's always presented over there, I'm talking about nonfiction, all of it seems to always have some kind of foundation coming from somewhere else. And then something pops up and it turns out it's true. And it's pretty amazing when it comes to conspiracy theory. We're not all crazy, and things like The Prisoner, quite honestly, open up our eyes. And if we didn't have nonfiction like that or fantasy like that, then we would close ourselves off and we would continue to ride that treadmill every day and ignore what was going on around us.
Yes. I mean, I'll give you two quite interesting statistics, and I believe it's not quite the same in North America, but if you take polls, and public polls have been taken on certain things, let's take Dr. David Kelly and Princess Diana. Around, and it's a similar figure for both, around 90% of the British population believe that Kelly was murdered and that Diana was assassinated. Now, you can have inquest after public inquest which says that wasn't the case, but people don't believe it. They will go more with the conspiracy view over here. But not just because they want to believe that. It's because they see for themselves that the evidence doesn't add up. For anybody listening, I mean, Dr. David Kelly was the UN weapons inspector who said there are no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And after the Blair administration had him very publicly vilified and attacked for saying this, he was then found dead in the woods a few weeks later. So the official view is it was suicide. He was ashamed. He was depressed at everything that happened to him. But I'm afraid when you look at the evidence, the wounds in his wrist couldn't have killed him. There was very little blood loss, very little drug in his system, and his body was provably moved from where it was originally found by the search party, slumped peacefully against a tree, to where he was then photographed by the police lying on the ground with a knife on his chest in a kind of classic suicide pose.
Right.
It's very obvious it was redressed to make it look like a suicide. And at the time, I remember when the news came through of his death, almost everybody went, "Oh, that's not true,"
Right.
when they said it was suicide. And similarly with Princess Diana. Now, she was very loved, of course, around the world, but especially here. And yes, there was always that little sense of denial. People didn't want to accept that she was gone. But it was also because there are so many unanswered questions around the circumstances of her death. And that's the thing, you see, the inquests for both Kelly and Diana basically deliberately did not investigate anything that might come up with a conspiracy that says it was murder. So by avoiding those things, of course, they come up with the answer that they wanted in the first place. But the public can see that. And most people in their gut feel there's something very, very wrong about both cases. So from that point of view, when you take polls, yeah, I think we're much, much more open to believing in conspiracy than, well, certainly many other countries. I can't speak for all of them.
Do you think we'll ever find out the truth about David Kelly? And I compare David Kelly, strangely enough, to John F. Kennedy. And let me explain why. At the time of the assassination of Kennedy, we accepted the status quo. Lone gunman, shot, a book repository, boom, done, one guy. And then here we are 50 years later, and we know, we know there was something really, really wrong about the death of John F. Kennedy. That if everything that they said to us was not true, period. And now with David Kelly, even though when he did die, and I remember I heard it, and I just went, well, there's, okay, he was killed. You just assume that out of the gate, that kind of coincidence. Sure. But do you think that we'll continue to investigate, and we just won't let his situation stay where it is?
Well, I don't know if you're aware, but when a lot of people, including a lot of doctors and just qualified professionals, did raise serious issues about the very uncertain autopsy reports on Kelly, instead of then saying, okay, well, look, here's all the medical records, you can see for yourself why it was suicide. Instead of doing that, Lord Hutton, who had been appointed to lead the inquiry into it, did the opposite. He put an order in where we will never, and this is still in place now, we will never be allowed to see the medical records for another 70 years.
Right.
Now, this was 5 or 6 years ago, so we've got 60-something years to go before we ever get to see the records. Well, now, if that isn't suspicious, I don't know what is, because they could have proved their case then and there, but instead what they did was put a block in so that we could never see the evidence for why he died. And I mean, I should say here also, one of our now ex-members of Parliament, he recently got voted out, but when he was in Parliament, there are some good people in Parliament, and a guy called Norman Baker, he was well known as being quite a challenging member of Parliament. He would often speak out about things that others wouldn't. And he published a book called The Strange Death of Dr. David Kelly, which basically proved, as much as you're ever going to have proof, that it was indeed murder and not suicide. And although he kind of held back from saying who had done it, nonetheless, you have to say when a member of Parliament starts putting out books like that, I think you have to say there's a very strong case to be made. The rest of the British Parliament more or less just looked at their feet and didn't say anything, which is a sure sign that he was probably on the right lines.
Well, isn't that how a conspiracy theory starts? That's exactly how it starts. If if governments, ours, yours, and others, just answered questions and put it out there, then the conspiracy side of things doesn't germinate. But when you go and do a 70-year block, just like they did on Kennedy, that's there so everybody dies, right? Everybody's dead, and now you can't go back and question the players. That's why the 70 years is there. But you do that with a situation with David Kelly, and now the conspiracy theorists rise up and they start to do their own inquiry and write their own story. And it could all be prevented if it was indeed a suicide. Well, then let's see the evidence on it. Don't close it off.
Well, I mean, one of the points that I've made quite publicly, especially in my books, The Truth Agenda and Conspiracies, is this. which is that if the authorities don't like conspiracies being told about them or conspiracy tales, they ought to behave differently, because they seem to do everything to just invite them.
Right.
And they're either doing that deliberately as some weird kind of double bluff, or they just still don't get it. And the way that they do not answer questions clearly, the way that, as you've just said, they put blocks in instead of opening up the evidence, is guaranteeing conspiracies, and they deserve conspiracies. And it's quite amazing how they still seem to get angry at all these conspiracy theorists, and you say they've only got themselves to blame, because the whole way they approach these things could be so different, but they seem to choose not to. And funnily enough, you get more and more conspiracy theories. So yeah, they have essentially created this situation by not being straight, by refusing to disclose evidence that should be easy to disclose. And this happens again and again.
Is the Queen Mother reptilian?
That is a whole other issue, isn't it? I mean, this is the thing. The reptilian agenda theory, which says that the secret ruling elite that governs the world is effectively charged up by an extraterrestrial bloodline, which has at the top the British royal family as the main party. It's quite astonishing how widely this is now believed, to the point where just a few weeks ago there was a joke on a mainstream comedy radio show about it, and everybody seemed to know what this was referring to. I think that's quite a good sign that a conspiracy theory really has gone mainstream. Obviously, it gets a lot of ridicule. People like David Icke really have put this idea out there. Certainly, I mean, my view on this, for what it's worth, is there is no question that there are myths and legends which do speak of a race from somewhere else interbreeding with mankind. You got the story in the book of Genesis. You've got it in other myths and legends. There is also no question that ancient knowledge and symbols, be it pyramids or needles or numerous other symbols, they're still used by powerful parties in the world today as symbols of power. And certainly bloodlines are fought over. And you don't get to be in a position of influence without being of the right stock in some areas, and we know historically whole wars have been fought over the British royal bloodline. That, of course, doesn't prove that it is a reptilian extraterrestrial bloodline, but in my view, and I've always said this, I don't think it matters too much either way, because you are still dealing with people in very high positions that can be very ruthless, and whichever way you look at it, they are doing what they are doing, whether they are aliens or whether they are people, and we still have to deal with the results. So in a way, to me, it doesn't really matter which way it is. We've still got to deal with it.
Well, you bring up a good point, because the conspiracy behind the reptilian monarchy has millions and millions of followers behind it. Is it because we like a good conspiracy, or is there something that is allowing it to continue and have legs?
I think there's something deeper here with the reptilian agenda. I think there is a lot of horror at the way the authorities can behave. And I think there is an enormous amount of concern about the things that some of these people do. And I think, therefore, what's going on by saying, well, they are alien, they are an extraterrestrial bloodline, what people are trying to do psychologically there is say, we are not part of this. We are removed from this. We are not you, because people are so appalled at the behavior they see. It's a psychological way of separation by saying, well, you must be reptilian lizards. Even if you symbolically see it as that, you're saying that, you people are not part of our race. We don't want to be associated with you, which is fair enough, really. So, I think you could examine it from a number of different angles. And certainly, it does sometimes seem that those in in power really do remove themselves from us and don't deserve to be called human very often. So there's another reason for why I think there is such a wide belief in this. And hey, maybe it turns out it's true and they are extraterrestrials. But as I say, to me, you're dealing with the same thing. And I don't think we should argue for too long about it. I think we should spend more time dealing with what's actually going on and what the powers that be are actually doing and trying to combat the things that are very obviously wrong.
Let's take a quick break. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Right now, Andy Thomas live from the UK. More with Andy when we come back. Follow us on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Email is jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. When we come back after the break, we're going to jump into Rendlesham. We'll be back right after this. Stay with us.
Way out here, we listen to Jimmy Church.
You're listening to Fade to Black.
Always on the edge of the hottest alternative talk. Jimmy Church with Fade to Black. KGRARadio.com.
Hey, everybody. What's up? Jimmy Church of Fade to Black. And check this out. The 2015 MUFON Symposium will be held this September 24th through the 27th in beautiful downtown Irvine, California. Expanding ufology, opening new doors in academia, industry, and media. Former Defense Minister of Canada Paul Hellyer will be there in person. Former CNN news anchor Cheryl Jones, TV news journalist Jaime Maussan, and MUFON's chief photo analyst Mark D'Antonio. They're just a few of the growing list of names for the 2015 event. It's September 24th through the 27th at the beautiful Hotel Irvine. Get your tickets today at MUFONSymposium.com. That's MUFONSymposium.com. Go Beckley Tappy.
¿Qué tal, mis amigos? Yo soy Mario Carson, el tiburón, y los invito para que escuchen a mi buen amigo Jimmy Church Radio. ¡Claro que sí!
Did you ever turn to your radio for your favorite talk show to find that it's been preempted for this?
In the air to deep right center. Back goes Lewis to the wall, and it's out of here!
Or this?
And I'm ashamed of you, Hillary, for voting for it.
Do you have a favorite talk radio program that's not available in your city? Just go to TalkStreamLive.com for links to the best streaming talk radio shows. At TalkStream Live, you will find live talk shows 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. All your favorites are here. With such a large selection, you will also discover some new favorites. On the go and still want to listen? With a mobile smartphone, simply type TalkStream Live on your internet browser. Now you can take internet radio with you. You will also find hundreds of music, news, and sports streams. Best of all, the TalkStream Live directory is free and there's never a login required. Remember TalkStreamLive.com, the fastest route between you and your favorite talk radio show.
You are listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
Oi, oi, I'm Reese Evans. You're listening to Jimmy Church. This is Revolution. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution is on radio. Ciao.
Welcome back. This is Fade to Black, bespoke radio for the masses. Yes, on the Game Changer Network and KGRA, The Planet. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, right now live from the UK. Andy Thomas. Andy, I said before the break, I wanted to jump into Rendlesham for a few different reasons. Number one, it's right there in the UK. That's the first thing. Second, there definitely seems to be some type of cover-up going on with not only your MI division over there, but the government and the military too as well. How does the UK look at Rendlesham? Is it as popular of a subject like it is over here in the United States? Is it something that's discussed over there?
Well, I mean, what I think is interesting with Rendlesham is, so, I mean, in America, it seems to me, if you say Roswell or the Roswell incident, most people have some idea in their head of what that refers to. That is not yet true over here of Rendlesham. If you say Rendlesham Forest to the average person, they won't make any connection. They won't know what you're talking about unless you are already in the world of UFO research or conspiracies, where, of course, then you know what's being referred to. But no, it's funny, it hasn't really gone public here in the way that, say, Roswell has. And in fact, if you mention Roswell over here, even people over here, they know what that is, or at least vaguely. So no, Rendlesham, I get the feeling the authorities have done a very good job in making sure that it doesn't really go public, or not public enough that it becomes like an everyday trope, you know. I mean, what I would say also with Rendlesham is, for those that are interested, of course, there have been, rather like Roswell, there have been so many new stories, new versions, denials of the denials, and then changing the minds of all the people involved with it. Of course, it's done the classic thing of making it almost impossible to know what really happened there. But what we can say didn't happen, I mean, there are some, I mean, for anybody listening who doesn't know what we're talking about, and I don't suppose there are many, but, you know, this is an Air Force base, a US Air Force base in England, where a number of the staff there saw, it would seem very obviously, a classic UFO at very close quarters and strange goings on. What we know it wasn't, which is one of the official explanations that still goes around today, is that they saw a lighthouse in the distance and thought it was a UFO. Now, think about that, because this lighthouse presumably has always been there, and then one night, suddenly they're going to think it's a UFO. I mean, this is the kind of madness that is fed out there into the mainstream for anybody that is listening. And, you know, it is just such an obvious disinformation story. But it's incredible how that still keeps going around. So, I mean, what I think is more interesting with Rendlesham is the fact that, I mean, one rumor is that at Rendlesham itself there were nuclear weapons.
Right.
Now, this has never been officially acknowledged, but there are staff who've claimed that they were there. There are even some who say that the Greenham Common Base, which in the 80s was the scene of a lot of protests from British people trying to get rid of the American nuclear weapons, it is often said that maybe the weapons weren't actually at Greenham, they were at Rendlesham. And there have, of course, around the world been a number of cases of military bases, most famously Malmstrom in America, which have had sightings of UFOs or encounters where these craft, whatever they are, appear to have the powers to shut down the nuclear missiles. And, you know, people like Colonel Robert Salas has gone very public with his own claims. A man that I've met seems to be a man of integrity. And again, with Rendlesham, if there were nuclear missiles there, could it be that what was going on was some kind of warning, or, you know, something was making a point that it could intercede and just get through any kind of security if it wanted to, and therefore the authorities have no choice but to come up with ridiculous debunking stories like saying that people saw lighthouses.
Have you been to Rendlesham?
No, it's a funny thing. I've never actually gone there myself. It is something that I am overdue in doing. But I don't believe you. Obviously, you're not going to get inside any of the base areas there. But no, it is something I'm sure I should do. But that said, people I've known who have gone have not come back as such with anything they didn't already know. But it's always very interesting to see these places, of course.
Yeah, I just want to go to Rendlesham myself and look for the lighthouse. That's all. I just want to see how...
Oh, well, the lighthouse is there. I mean, I think we can all see the lighthouse. But, I mean, it's crazy. And the lighthouse is not in the immediate vicinity even of where the sighting was, which makes it even more ridiculous. And the story says, well, a heavy fog and a mist came down and it made it seem nearer than it was. I mean, it's madness. And I don't think we should spend too much time on that.
Yeah, well, that's exactly my point. I mean, if you just go there, because we've heard all the stories, just walk into the forest. Let's see, for yourself what they're trying to make us believe. The official story, because it just doesn't make sense to me how military personnel who know the difference between an airplane and a car know the difference between a lighthouse in the distance that's been there forever, and they've been watching that light rotate forever. They know that it's there. Then suddenly they make this mistake. It just doesn't make any sense. The official story doesn't make any sense. And also with Rendlesham, with the official knowledge, the Jenny Randall reporting years ago about different members of Parliament talking about it and acknowledging it and creating an alternative story. Have you looked into that too as well?
Yes, but I mean the difficulty is that you never really get this stuff verified. Now, yeah, for sure, Jenny Randall has certainly believed, as I'm sure she's right, that there would have been an official investigation, as of course there must have been, but getting, any kind of secret body like the Ministry of Defence or whatever to ever share publicly what's going on, I mean, it's just not going to happen, frankly. And the problem is that there is a lot of misinformation out there. You can't ever really be sure that some of the reports that do leak out, whether they're real or not, is that in itself misinformation. I always think in these areas that at the end of the day, you have to see what feels right in your gut, because sometimes there's no way of knowing whether some of this information is true or not, and you just have to try and apply logic and see how it feels. But sometimes I think we have to accept we're never quite going to get to the bottom of it. And I certainly think you've got a similar situation with Roswell, where again, there's so much now myth and legend and denial and counter-denial mixed in. It's almost impossible now to really say for sure what happened, other than we can say something odd happened. But unless you were there at the time, I really think it's almost impossible now to know.
Well, let's stay on Roswell for a second. The best evidence for Roswell, and I've had every player that's still alive with Roswell on my show, and I've asked them all the same question, which is, what is the single best piece of evidence if you're in court and you need to slide something forward, and this is it, this is your best evidence, what is it? And I've had different answers from everybody. For me, it's quite simply the newspaper, the press release, and the radio broadcast, because that was the official statement released by the United States Army Airfield there. And that's why I think that Roswell actually happened. We were dangerously close to getting it fully blown out, but that happened. That actually happened. And for you, when you look at Roswell, what's the best evidence that the Roswell incident actually occurred?
Oh, well, I sometimes find the best evidence is when the cover stories start to get ridiculous. Now, I mean, initially, of course, the first cover story was that it was a weather balloon, and there's the famous photographs of Major Jesse Marcel showing to journalists fragments of a weather balloon. Now, that could never explain all the aspects of the story. That then began to change over the years. Then it was said it was a device from Project Mogul, of course, which was a device which was used to detect, essentially echoes from Soviet atomic tests.
Right.
But that, of course, that only explains so much. And then you get to the whole business of people who claim to have seen the alien bodies. Now, I did think it was really interesting. We're probably talking now nearly 25 years ago, but when the US military released a final sort of cover story to explain what the alien bodies were, and you may well be aware of this, I'm sure you are, then suddenly out of the blue comes this story that what they were crash test dummies. Now, I mean, if you do read some of the testimony of people who claim they saw the bodies, I mean, you think, well, next time, God forbid, I ever get taken into hospital, I really hope that doctors and nurses can tell the difference between a body and a crash test dummy.
Right.
And this is where you realize, okay, there's a desperation creeping in here. And that, to me, it's the denials and the desperate stories that make it clear to me something did occur. But as I say, on my personal feelings, I don't think we're ever going to know 100% what happened. I think we're close to, as you've said, all the different witnesses. We're close to the basic idea of it. But I suspect until the day we invent a time machine, we are not going to know 100% for sure.
One of the fascinating aspects about Roswell that is more and more clear to me every single day is the success that the government had in shutting down the story. Because if you go back historically, go back and listen to news programs, listen to old radio programs, ufologists discussing famous cases in the 50s and the 60s, which I have a lot, and just go back and look, there was nothing at all from 1947 until 1980. There's this huge gap of nothing about Roswell. It was as absolute of a successful cover-up. They almost did it. And it's fascinating to me how successful it really was. And when all of the evidence came out in 1980 and Jesse Marcel came forward and other witnesses came forward and other evidence started to come forward, we realized that this was a successful cover-up and we almost didn't know anything. Isn't that just mind-blowing? And if that occurred, then what else around us is the same thing? Again, it's the fuel to the fire to the conspiracy theory.
It is. I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because, like you say, they nearly got away with it there, and it was not talked about, for all this time. But then, I mean, it's quite extraordinary what is out there and knowledge that is available, even in the mainstream, that still never really gets investigated. I mean, if you look at, say, Project Blue Book, now, Project Blue Book was the kind of official, U.S. military investigation into all the, UFO sightings that have been made over the years. Now, it's often said that Project Blue Book was just nothing more than a kind of, an official, giving the appearance of caring and brushing it under the carpet. But what I always find interesting is, I mean, I think they investigated something like over 12,000 sightings. And although they said most of them were, I think, due to natural phenomena or misidentified aircraft and all of this, quite incredibly, they did accept that there were, I think it was 22% of cases they said they could not explain. Well, out of 12,000 sightings, 22% is an enormous amount of sightings where you're effectively saying something did happen that they can't explain. But that never got followed up. And that's just left adrift in the ether, this figure. And then nobody in the mainstream picks it up, and so it just falls into history. But I've always looked at Project Blue Book and thought, well, admitting that 22% of 12,000 might be unexplained, or at least you need a better explanation, I thought that was quite an admission, really. But that often gets missed.
You guys have your same situation going on now with the Condign report and the release of documents over in the UK. Do you think, and I also want to talk about Nick Pope as well. He's a friend. He's been on this show many, many times. But could he be an instrument of disinfo with the release of these documents? He knows certainly what was there and what has been released. So he knows what the balance of material is. Is there something going on there? And are we looking dead straight into another conspiracy?
I'm almost certain that we are, but again, it's knowing what end of the spectrum we're on with it. I mean, this is the problem, and Nick, who is a gentleman that I have met and I find very good company, but yes, he is a very controversial figure, and there are many people that do not believe that he is telling the truth of, what he says. And of course, others have accused him of being an official debunker, he is a shill, etc., etc. Well, we all get accused of that sooner or later, it would seem. But certainly, yeah, I mean, I think you have to say that anybody that is claiming to have inside knowledge, of course, is then almost immediately going to be seen as potentially suspect in what they're saying, because is this in itself an attempt at misleading the public? So, yes, so over here we had this huge release of UFO documents, but it never really came out with anything that seemed to be of any great substance. And it was brushed under the carpet again as just saying, well, there you go, there's nothing really going on. But then again, you look at the evidence, and there were again quite a lot of cases there which really were not resolved and certainly deserved more attention. So I think this is the problem, and it is a problem in conspiracy realms in general, but it does seem particularly rife in the UFO world, that you get not only accusations that people are agents for, one group or another, but you then get fighting factions within the research community itself. And that, of course, then destroys it rather neatly from within. And this would, I think, seem to be the intention. And I've always thought that we should learn to accept, I think, more, shall we say gently, the differences between the different factions in all investigations of conspiracy. Because when it turns nasty, then the unity falls apart. Then the outside world looks in and says, well, hey, these guys can't even get their own act together. Why should we be interested? And then presumably the authorities rub their hands with glee. And it's a problem. And I don't quite know how you get around it, other than you just surely try to gather as much information as you can that you could call evidence. And I think that is why with something like Roswell, there is a serious case to be made, because there are so many people who have spoken about it. Even if they don't all agree 100% with each other, you can get a basic idea. So, with all of these areas, it is very much about evidence. And the only thing with claimed evidence that's been released by people that used to work for the authorities is you can never be quite sure that that's genuine. So you need to get that backed up from as many other sources as you possibly can for it to be meaningful.
Do you remember last year at Heathrow when they had the UFO sightings and it hit the press and over in the UK fairly quickly? But then 2 days later, there was no investigation and no mention about anything anywhere. Why do you think that was?
Well, I think the same reason that all of these things normally fall out of the press very quickly. I mean, I can give you another example, actually, of something. So, yes, that was a prime example. It's news at first, and then it just literally vanishes. If you go back a little further, in 2010... there was a huge sighting. I mean, thousands of people saw it, of this huge spiral in the skies over Norway. And it was an amazing spiral. It had a kind of a blue sort of trail leading up to this sort of swirling, very bizarre. I mean, there's film of it. This sort of, it goes from like a black hole to then a blue spiral and back again. And thousands of people saw this. Now, this did make the news, and it was reported in newspapers around the world, but certainly over here. So it seemed to be like an intriguing mystery. But then it's forgotten almost overnight. And, of course, we were programmed to forget, because the story that then was sort of very gently released to explain it was that this spiral was a Russian missile going wrong. Now, if it was a Russian missile going wrong, you've got to ask, well, why didn't this trigger an international incident? Because what was it doing over Norway? But then you also have to say, well, if it was a Russian missile, how do you then explain that these spirals have been seen several times around the world since? We've had sightings over the Gold Coast of Australia, in the Middle East. There was one over Mexico not so long back. So this is now a recurring phenomenon. But what's notable is it no longer makes the mainstream media. So it's like a journalist thought, wow, this first spiral in Norway, that's a good story. And then either they think themselves, hang on, I better back off, or, as of course many people believe, they basically quietly get the order, shut up. And so they do. And now the other sightings, the spirals, which seem to me just as dramatic, and you'll find them on the internet, they are not reported in the mainstream. So, this goes on over and over again, and then this comes back to where we started. The version of reality that we are presented within the mainstream is a facade. It is a fake view of the world that makes you think nothing remotely bizarre ever occurs. And it is a lie, and this is not how the world really is, of course.
Why do you think other countries besides the United States, and I'm specifically talking about governments, is so outspoken and willing to talk about the UFO phenomenon, and they stop short of, and they're waiting for the United States to take the lead? Why do you think there is an openness and almost a disclosure globally, but the United States doesn't, so everybody stops in their tracks? The phenomenon just isn't here in the United States. It's a global phenomenon.
To be sure. I mean, it's worth noting, isn't it? I mean, that I think just a few years back now, I think it was the ex-Minister of Defense went public with saying, well, there absolutely is a UFO phenomenon and there absolutely is a cover-up. And again, I think the Mexican Air Force, is the only official body in the world to have actually said there is a phenomenon official. Now, they don't go on to say what they think's going on, but they do accept it. And of course, around Mexico City especially, there have been huge amounts of sightings over the years. But yes, it does seem that either the US is essentially, these are the people holding the cards, and okay, if the claims and the rumors are true, there are various extraterrestrial intelligences which are communicating directly with them above other countries. If that is the case, then of course, yes, until the day they come forward and say, all right, guys, here's the truth, we're not going to get close to it. But equally, of course, if they ever do come out and say that, you're now going to have instantly lots of people saying, yeah, but how do we know that's not a lie? There's been a lot of fears of fake alien invasions being mounted as a control tool. So now, whichever way it goes, whether they admit it and it's true, or whether they say now, yes, there are UFOs and we don't believe it's true, it's going to be incredibly confusing and I think quite a frightening time when it does happen, because again, you will not know who to believe.
And then you have the Belgian wave, and they were very close. I mean, they were very public. They were scared, too, as well, because they didn't know what was going on. But also very, very close to some type of disclosure, and then it just stopped. And the triangles didn't go away. What happened, happened. But the wave itself stopped. And as you look back at that, and I truly believe there's a conspiracy there, do you think that was us? The triangles? Do you think the triangles were some weapon that we were developing, and that's why it was hushed up and not necessarily, extraterrestrial?
I mean, this is one of the interesting things, isn't it? Because there is now quite a handy cover story for the U.S. authorities, because the black triangles, yes, I mean, they have been seen for decades now, but now it's sort of not officially acknowledged, but sort of not denied either, that things like the Aurora Project,
right,
which is said to be a kind of black triangle type thing, is out there somewhere now. Is that really the case, or is that a handy cover for black triangles which are nothing to do with the authorities? So it's kind of quite a clever double bluff, because by sort of not 100% denying that there is a secret project out there, that allows people who do see the black triangles to think, oh, well, maybe it's just a military test thing. Whereas, of course, maybe they're not all. I mean, this is the thing. If you believe, as many do, that authorities, not just in America, are capturing extraterrestrial equipment or retrieving it, whichever way you want to look at it, and are using that to reverse engineer it into modern military technology, then yeah, it is perfectly possible some of the things we see could be external in origin, but others could be military, and others even hybrids. So when you're dealing with stuff like this, It really is incredibly hard to ever know what's going on. And that's where I think you have to kind of step back from it and grasp your sanity and say, okay, I'm just going to try to observe what's going on here, keep an open mind, and just try and keep the flow of evidence as pure as possible. But coming to an absolute conclusion is extremely difficult. And I think sometimes we get into trouble when we force a conclusion in the absence of evidence, and that's when you get the dogma coming in from people who have, very heartfelt convictions and beliefs, but they argue them so powerfully that it, after a while, feels like an attack on anybody that doesn't agree with that. And that's, again, where you get the factional infighting. And that's a shame, because that's when the truth movements start to fall apart. But of course, maybe that's the whole idea.
Yeah,
That is the hope of the authorities, and it works quite well if that is the idea.
Do you guys have your own, the UK, do you have your own crash retrieval bodies at a secret base story?
Well, I mean, again, that comes down to what you believe about Rendlesham, I think, really, because on the surface it appears to be just a sighting, but then you get claims that artifacts were found, and yes, they're in underground hangars somewhere. I mean, you just don't know. We do not have an Area 51 as such. There are various places around the country that have had UFO flaps, Bonnybridge in Scotland, Warminster in Wiltshire, particularly in the 1970s. But that's not the same necessarily as saying that there are secret military bases. We have Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, where there's a lot of military activity there, a lot of ground which you can't fly over. So, it is always possible stuff's going on there. But no, there's nothing as definite as the claims that you seem to have out there. And I think you have cornered the market, really, for these kinds of claims. But, I mean, maybe that's because it's true. And maybe it is the case that, if the US is taking the lead on all of that kind of thing, and they expect other countries to fall in line to support them on that, it may well be that that is the case.
Let's switch to 9/11. We just came out off of the anniversary. We're still in September. It was 11 days ago. Today is the 22nd. Let's kind of start there. The conspiracy, for me, starts and ends with I truly believe, with the evidence that is out there, that the White House and Washington, D.C. and Saudi Arabia all knew in advance that something was going to happen. And that is where the conspiracy starts. And it of course, has gone off in every direction. What's your take on 9/11?
Well, I mean, I think anybody out there who does still believe the official story really does need to sit down and really look at the real evidence. In my book, The Truth Agenda, I spend a long, long chapter analyzing 9/11 because it is such a key moment in our history, and it is an area where I think you can categorically show we have been lied to. And anybody that says otherwise, they're just not looking at what's happened. And I mean, here's the thing. So you're absolutely right. 9/11 was clearly anticipated by all kinds of people. I mean, one thing that I think deserves more attention is that there was a lot of insider trading on the stock market in the run-up to 9/11. I think there was something like a 1,200% increase in what's called put options, which is where you basically bet that the stock of a company is going to go down. And all the major companies, particularly the two airlines that, of course, suffered the most on 9/11, well, there was an awful lot of put options put on those companies, and a lot of money was made. Well, why would anybody do that? How would anybody suddenly sense that something terrible was going to happen to those companies? That makes it absolutely obvious people knew. There were people not turning up for work that day. The mayor of San Francisco, Willie Brown, was warned not to fly to New York that day, and you get story after story like this. I mean, even the authorities themselves have accepted there had been warnings that something might happen that they then ignored. And it's just absolutely clear this was something planned, and clearly people on the inside knew it was planned and yet did nothing to protect the people that died and suffered as a result. That is obviously, whichever way you look at it, a conspiracy in the truest sense of the word. So yes, the bin Laden story is a conspiracy theory, as they call it, the official conspiracy theory. But, I think we can categorically say in this case that there were people within command and control within America that either allowed it to happen, or, as seems much more likely, coordinated it to happen. And you wouldn't need that many people to do it. People often say to me, yes, but you'd need thousands of people. You wouldn't. If you look at some of the studies, you would need a relatively few people to sow enough confusion along the line of command. And some people who perhaps were drawn in to helping to coordinate this might not even have known what it was they were doing. I mean, you compartmentalize if you're clever so that, one arm does not know what the other arm is doing. But yeah, I mean, you stand back from 9/11 and you look at the many, many anomalies which range from the laws of physics seemingly being contravened completely to crazy things like, the worst pilot in the world managing to execute a perfect turn into the Pentagon, suddenly a brilliant pilot when he never was before. You have so many things wrong with the story of Flight 93. You've got obvious lies, obvious cover-ups from people like Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld as to when they knew what they knew and when they knew when the planes were coming in, contradicted even by their own staff members like Norman Mineta, who I don't think he was trying to land them in it. I think he was just telling his story as he knew it. And it's absolutely obvious. And they've, edited air traffic control transcripts. I mean, where do you want to end? It's not just one thing. People often say, nobody would do that to their own people. America would never do that. Well, no, America didn't. But I think there was a traitorous group of people within it who were working to a wider agenda that wasn't about America. I think it was about their own interests. Call it New World Order, call it whatever you want, Illuminati, whatever works for you. But essentially they became not American that day. And I'm sure, as you've just mentioned, Saudi Arabia there are plenty of factions outside of America that would have known and would also have been playing their roles. And I include within that very likely MI6 over here in Britain. So sadly, when you stand back and you look at it, whichever angle you look at 9/11 from, it simply does not make any sense when you hear the official story as set against what actually happened.
Well, even if you accept, I hate to use the word dogma, but it is in this case, it was terrorists and they flew planes into the building. Even if that was, and Washington had nothing to do with it, Saudi Arabia didn't know, it was just bin Laden and just the terrorists. How are those buildings falling? It just doesn't make any sense. Any normal person can look. I've been to the World Trade Center, Andy, and I got to tell you, when you go into the World Trade, the old ones, and you walk in that ground floor and you walk in the lobby and you see the size, the powerful structure, it is so unbelievably strong. It's the only way I can explain it. You just know that, you have 100+ stories standing above you, and it's the strength of the building. And once you know that, a plane flying into it that high up, into the top of the building, if it was the base of the building, okay, all right, we can kind of go there. But it was at the top of the building. It just doesn't make any sense. How they brought him down, I don't know. But it just doesn't make any sense that it would be planes at the top of these buildings that would cause the buildings to fall. And
well, Yeah. I mean, the thing is, with that, even if they began to collapse, which, okay, that's possible they could have done because of the fire and the damage, they should not have collapsed in the very fast, very even way that they do. In the end, surely there would have been an unevenness. The collapse would have stopped itself. It wouldn't. It's so obvious that they are being basically exploded. They are not falling. They are not collapsing. They are exploding, as you can see when the tops of the Twin Towers begin to disintegrate. And the fact that, there was debris and indeed body parts found at the tops of buildings several blocks away, even years later, shows you there was an enormous propulsive force when those buildings came down. That is not a collapse, because stuff then should essentially have all fallen into its own footprint. But instead, stuff's been thrown an awful long way. And when you see analysis of some of the footage of the collapse, not only do you see little puffs of explosions going off right down the length of the tower, but when you see how far some of the debris is being flung out, it contravenes all the laws of physics if that is a natural falling. And that is why many people say there must be an explosive force. And what I think is slightly unfortunate in the world of 9/11 truth research is that, again, we've got a factionalism that's come in. Some say that it was nanothermate or some kind of explosives. Others go with the Dr. Judy Wood theories and micronuclear technology and all of this. To me, it's slightly irrelevant on one level, because you can all agree that what we're seeing are not natural collapses. And of course, all of this is thrown into perspective by the fact that building number 7, a couple of blocks away from 9/11's Twin Towers that everybody remembers, the fact that Building 7 suddenly tumbles down into its own footprint very neatly a few hours later, when it was never hit by an aeroplane and exhibited only very limited fires, is one of the most extraordinary mysteries of architectural history, even without the rest of 9/11 going on around it. And of course, many people have said that was in fact where 9/11 was coordinated from, and the evidence had to come down. And there was a lot of other stuff going on in that building, investigations, all kinds of things that it was very convenient to have destroyed. Whichever way you look at it, nothing about it makes any sense. And it's an amazing thing that the world has seemingly been fooled into thinking it's all perfectly normal. We had a television program here just a couple of weeks ago on the anniversary of 9/11, which tried to sort of explain how the towers fell as much as they did. And it was because of aluminium from the aeroplanes reacting in the fires and burning much hotter and far more terribly than they would have done otherwise. And when you hear this, it is so insane, because that just addresses almost nothing. And it's just a fairy tale being sold to the public, basically, to stop people thinking about the real evidence.
Yeah, I had somebody ask me, and I did investigations on this a couple of months ago, and they were, well, give me another example. And I said, well, wait a minute, check this out. Did you know a B-25 flew into the 80th floor of the Empire State Building and exploded, and they had a fire? Yes.
Well, indeed so, yes.
Yes, and as far as I know, last time I checked, the Empire State Building is still standing. So you can't.
Yeah.
You can't.
Well, yes, and there have been many tower blocks around the world built in a very similar way to the Twin Towers, or indeed Building Number 7, which have had raging fires that have gone on for more than 2 days.
Right.
And they haven't fallen down. Yes, there might be a skeletal framework at the other end of it, but they are designed not to fall. And certainly Building Number 7. Which again, they always say, oh, well, there was more fire than it looks, and there was a structural defect. That's just complete baloney. David Ray Griffin, I think, in his book about Building 7, which just focuses mainly on that, I think makes such an obvious case that, one of the big arguments they make is, oh, well, there was steel in concrete, and because basically, the concrete and the steel, they expanded at different rates and they pulled apart. is completely scientifically nonsense, because they are made to go together because they expand at pretty much the same rate. So the notion even that that's what brought the towers down makes no sense. And what really clinches it is in the computer models that NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, that is the official mouthpiece really essentially for the state over there, in their models for how, say, Building 7 came down, they base their computer models on presumed fires, not the fires that were really there. So what they've done is create a computer model where they say, okay, what fires would you need where to bring that building down? So they built them into their computer model and said, well, there you go. But it's not actually the fires that were there in the building on the day. And as David Ray Griffin says, this is scientific fraud. And it works with some members of the public. Of course it does, because it sounds on the surface, if you don't look at the detail, reasonable. But, you know, for the amount of architects and engineers out there trying to get to the truth who look at this, I mean, if it wasn't so tragic, they would laugh, because it is just so plainly a lie.
With, that type of false flag operation, of which there's many around the world, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. What is the end game in something like 9/11? Okay, let's accept the fact that it was a conspiracy. There was people involved. We got this done. Thousands of lives, tragedy. But why do it?
Well, I mean, I think that there will be many benefits to this occurring. I mean, something that has been pointed out by many, many people, this is not new, but is, of course, that a couple of years or so before 9/11, you get this document, the Project for the New American Century, which basically says, well, how is America going to stay powerful in the world? And one of the things that it posits is that something that would be quite useful would be something like a new Pearl Harbor. So in other words, some kind of external attack would, of course, justify a new phase of imperialism. And just worth noting that many of the people that put their names to that document, like Paul Wolfowitz, Dick Cheney, of course, were then the very people in power when the new Pearl Harbor of 9/11 then, of course, occurs. Mm-hmm. And I think you've got to look a little bit more widely here, though, than just American imperialism. I mean, the New World Order project, I mean, this is something that I write about, that I speak about. It is real. You can trace its origins back. It goes back really to the beginning of the 20th century when the English Empire, or I should say the British Empire, was fading. We realized that we needed to basically join up with America and create something new. And there are letters, they're there in the archives, which clearly, prescribe the creation of what we today call the New World Order. And people like H.G. Wells used that phrase, the New World Order. And so, to facilitate that, to make sure that happens, you need certain crises to occur where you can then galvanize events and control the population through fear and political necessity. And of course, since 9/11, that justified many of the Western wars that have taken place in the Middle East, still going on today. ISIS and all of the rest of that is just the latest phase, it would seem, in a destabilization process in the Middle East that actually benefits the West in many ways. And moreover, 9/11, of course, gave the mandate to bring in incredible restrictions on human liberty, body scanners, talking about human microchipping, all of these things because the population was afraid. And I mean, so many fundamental freedoms we all took for granted were, just wiped away, particularly in your country with the Patriot Act. I mean, that effectively destroyed the Constitution and nobody noticed. It's tragic, but people went along with it because of the terrible events they'd all seen on the TV or indeed witnessed. And, of course, that gives you some possible explanation as to why somebody might stage it, because it's incredibly politically convenient for certain people in certain places of power.
With other things that have happened just so recently, and I'm talking about the parachutings with, tied to terrorists and all around North Africa and the influx of ICE. It just seems like these are opportunities also to take away freedoms and get people to react in Europe the same way that we're reacting over here. I mean, I haven't seen Paris rise up and be vocal about something in a long, long time. And they suddenly had a reason to do it. Do you think these were false flags too, and there's a conspiracy tied to these shootings?
Well, I mean, certainly many people do believe that. I mean, if you go online, you'll find endless reanalysis of the attacks on the offices of the Charlie Hebdo magazine in Paris. So, yes, there's an enormous amount of speculation that it was false flag. The way I would put it is this. I mean, again, it's very hard to know for sure. But let's say it did take place, as we were told. Nonetheless, the response of the authorities has gone too far in the wrong direction. And I mean, it was seen as deeply ironic by many people that in the wake of those attacks, a lot of the world leaders all go to Paris and they walk arm in arm through the streets, standing up for free speech. And the irony was that that very moment of standing up for free speech, of course, they were changing the small print and the rules so that there was even less free speech. And now in France, it's getting very hard over there to talk about conspiracy theories, for instance. And just over here, just a few weeks ago, our own Prime Minister, David Cameron, gave a speech in which he basically said that anybody that questions 9/11 is essentially a supporter of Muslim extremism and might be prosecuted for it. That was the inference of what he said. This is quite scary stuff because this is the thought police of George Orwell's nightmare vision apparently coming true in front of our eyes. So yes, I think there is an enormous amount of stuff going on in Europe at the moment that is really controlling through fear. And of course, I mean, we've now got the migrant crisis. The situation in Syria has finally boiled over to the point where nobody wants to be there, not if they value their lives, and now they're arriving here. Now there's two viewpoints on this. Is that a deliberate ploy? Is that serving somebody's needs? Or, as some suspect, could it be that the West essentially encouraged ISIS to rise, or at least allowed them? Because, I mean, the notion we didn't know that they were going to appear is madness. There's enough Western intelligence in those parts of the world that should have known very well that they were becoming powerful very quickly. But one view is the West let them rise in the hope that it would then give them a reason to go into Syria and start doing some of the things they've done just in the last few weeks even. You know, we're now getting involved in areas we've wanted to be involved in for a while. But there is a view that maybe the New World Order, whoever, they've miscalculated. That by letting ISIS rise, perhaps they thought, okay, this will be useful, but then we'll crush them when we're done with them. Maybe it's got out of hand and actually has got much bigger than they ever suspected. And now there is a genuine crisis. And that, in fact, with all the migrants, thousands of them, pouring across Europe, this is big stuff. And nobody is now quite sure how to deal with it. So if there was a destabilization program in the Middle East that was there to serve the needs of the New World Order, could it be that actually it's gone wrong and that, in fact, destabilization is going to come into Europe as well? Or is that part of the plan? This is the wonder of conspiracy theory. Whichever way you look at it, you can see a potential benefit to somebody somewhere. And again, it's trying to discern what is really going on. But, there's big stuff occurring at the moment in North Africa, in Europe, that is very much, I think, going to change our whole fundamental way of life here in the next few years, unless the Middle East can be in some way settled politically, because the war is not going to settle it. So, yeah, there's an awful lot of stuff happening at the moment, which a lot of people are very concerned about.
How would it affect Europe directly? That's an interesting point.
Well, it is affecting us because suddenly Europe is trying to find homes for an enormous influx of people from Syria and other countries in the region. I mean, we already had an awful lot of people wanting to get away from places like Libya, which the West left basically in an anarchic state, which is what we always seem to do, and that's where you have to wonder if it isn't the plan.
Right.
And people over there, they've had enough. They want to escape from these terrible gangs and factions that are just making life hell out there. So they're all flooding across the Mediterranean. But then, of course, yes, there is enormous sympathy for many people's plights. But if you suddenly have thousands of people suddenly coming in to your country and moving into your neighborhood, there's a clash of cultures. And how many people do you accept before you say, no, we can't take any more? At what point do you draw the line? And nobody knows where the line is at the moment. It's a big dilemma. A lot of people care. I mean, they see the terrible, situation going on with these people coming over, but they think, yeah, but what are we supposed to do? So, yeah, it is having a huge effect on Europe. And already, I mean, Germany is taking in an enormous amount of people. But, of course, there are some who are saying this is going too far. And then you get social problems. So I'm not saying I have a solution to this because I don't know what the solution is. But, yeah, absolutely. This is big stuff. Make no mistake.
Yeah, and this is what's trippy about it. I can't think of a better word than trippy. But originally, we let's arm ISIS. We'll have them fight Al Qaeda. That's what was going on over here. You know, that was the word on the street. That just sounded like a bad idea from the word go. It just didn't have a good ending to that story. There was just no way. But now, with this refugee crisis, of course we have sympathy. We want to help the women and the small children and the elderly and stuff. But who is, if there is, when you have Charlie Hebdo and you have these hidden microcells around Europe, obviously it's happening, whether it's a conspiracy, the Illuminati or not. But now you have tens of thousands, if not 1 million refugees flooding out of Syria. Who is checking on who is who? Because that is, if they want to cause havoc across Europe, and this is where I'm going with this, have thousands of ISIS-trained guys infiltrate Europe to rise up later. That's the first thing. But then this is what you get. Now you have all of the governments saying, hey, now we've got to go check out all these Muslim guys, all these Muslim, this profiling that's going to go on. And then you have that to close down society and restrict freedom as well. I can see it all playing out right in front of us, and it seems like we're not doing a single thing about it.
Well, I think you're very right in your analysis there. And I think the reason they're not doing a single thing about it is I don't think anybody knows at the moment what to actually do. You're absolutely right. We don't know who the people are coming in. There is almost no way of checking because there are so many of them. Extremism will always exist, and whether or not some of it is state-sponsored or not, you are still going to get some of it occurring. Whether we are going to see a rise in this because of this influx, well, that remains to be seen, but you're quite right. So what we're now seeing is responses from governments which effectively shut down, once again, fundamental freedoms. But of course, people go along with it because they are afraid, and they are kept afraid. We are continually fed fear stories in the media. And this is a problem. And I mean, it's very unfortunate because divide and rule is the oldest trick in the book.
Right.
And yes, there is a problem with Islamic fundamentalism. Nobody would deny that. But to turn people against Muslim people as a fear-mongering tool is equally not in anybody's interests at all. And to make the equation that some people make, well, therefore, if you're a Muslim, you are a potential terrorist, is ridiculous. And it's not helpful to society. It just creates more fear, more faction fighting. It's very unfortunate. And the only way we are, I suppose, going to avoid this is if everybody is incredibly conscious of how they're responding to this, why they're doing what they're doing, and keeping conversations very open. We need to stay conscious as human beings here and not just go for the gut punch reaction of what your instincts say, because it's very easy to lead that using certain scare stories in the media. So we have to keep our heads about this and keep our hearts and use compassion and show compassion where it's obviously appropriate. We have to have a little bit of suspicion where that is obviously appropriate, but we're going to really have to learn, as ever, to discern here. And I suspect this is going to go on for years. This is just the beginning.
I'm going to give you, here's my crystal ball, Andy. 2 months from now, here's the headline. Terrorist shoots up a hotel in Amsterdam, right? And he was a Syrian refugee trained by ISIS. Watch. Just watch. That's the next step. I'm not saying anything other than they'll use that for a tool in the future, but we allowed it to happen now. You watch that headline, word for word. Well, maybe not Amsterdam, but you get the gist.
For sure, and all I can say is I hope you're wrong, but I have a horrible fear you may well be right sooner or later. But again, it's when that moment happens, everybody needs to keep their heads and not just tar everybody with the same brush, because that is not helpful to human consciousness moving forward.
Yeah, is there any, with the reporting that you get over there, which is different than here, you're in Europe, is there any regulation at all? Is there any passport checking, visa checking, ID checking, background checking at all, or are they just moving around in large herds and they're going unchecked?
I mean, I don't think we should use the word herds, because obviously that kind of dehumanizes people a little bit too much. So I wouldn't use that word personally. But no, the sad thing is there are no checks. It's just not possible. There are too many people pouring across the borders. I mean, of course, now we're here in Britain, we're an island. And a lot of British people feel incredibly defensive at the moment. And sure, anybody trying to get in here, they're going to get a harder time. You know, it's not so easy just to swim across the English Channel. So we've had a lot of people trying to come through the train tunnels which run from Calais in France across to the south coast of England. And so that's the flashpoint there. But we at least do have more of a checking procedure. But yeah, I think in places like Hungary, in Europe, where, you know, people are just seemingly just coming wherever they can. I mean, they're trying to put fences up left, right, and centre, but even when they do that, you can't be checking the credentials and the papers and the passports of every single person. And yes, I think it is not possible to control it in that way.
And you had your own problems, too, with the London bombings. And do you think you guys were told, I'm talking when I say you guys, the UK, the status quo, that you guys were told the truth behind that?
Well, of course, many people doubt it. There are anomalies which have some resonance with the 9/11 anomalies. Now, I think where the difference is with 7/7 is that it was far less visible. Most of it took place underground, with the exception of the bus. But there are anomalies which have never really been explained. Now, one of the strange things about 9/11 was that there were exercises which were going on with people like NORAD and, you know, various American forces, which posited the scenario of the very buildings being attacked that were attacked actually on that day. And of course, this was used to create confusion, and it was a good cover. But it was strange then that on 7/7, as we call it, in 2005 in London, there was an interview with one of the, a man called Peter Power, a security consultant who was involved with what was going on. And he, in an early radio interview that day, categorically said that there were exercises going on across London, once again, in exactly the places where the attacks then really took place. Now, he has been challenged to explain himself here, because that's very strange, because it suggests, were security services secretly setting this up themselves? Were the bombers that we are told were Muslim terrorists, were they actually thinking they were taking part in an exercise, and maybe they weren't really bombers? The train that we are told, for instance, that they all first caught never ran. It was cancelled that morning. There are anomalies there. Very similarly with the hijackers at the airports with 9/11. The time codes on some of the security videos in London appear to have been manipulated, or they are not correct. There are so many things that are wrong. And we have, even in mainstream reports, a number of reports saying the explosions under the trains came up from beneath the trains.
Right.
Not from above, from a rucksack, which is what we were told. And indeed, some of the visual evidence would seem to support that. Now, that, of course, tells, therefore, a very different scenario to that which we were fed. And it's very hard to know for absolutely certain what really did occur. But, yeah, there are a lot of things that are very, very uncertain about what happened in London. And of course, therefore, a lot of people do think that it was a setup. And certainly, again, we are being discouraged from discussing this. And David Cameron also basically attacked anybody that said that British security services might have been involved with that. He again has said he wants to shut down any expression of that publicly. So again, we're back to thought control, which is very worrying.
This is Fade to Black. Tonight, Andy Thomas live from the UK. More when we come back. This is Bespoke Radio for the masses on KGRA, The Planet. We'll be back right after this. Stay with us.
Hi everybody, this is Rob Halford, the Metal Guard on JimmyChurchRadio.com.
KGRA Radio. Intelligent talk.
Are you a paranormal investigator, ghost hunter, or UFO skywatcher? If so, FNGinnovations.com has the product you definitely need in your investigations kit or go bag. Introducing the Morpholite Wide Beam Tactical Flashlights that put the light where you need it most. Traditional flashlights shine a focused round beam with limited line of sight in the dark. Morpholite Tactical Flashlights change all that, utilizing a revolutionary wide beam design to enable you to see safety hazards such as hanging wires and steel, pipes, and holes in the floor you just can't see with a focused round beam. In the field, where safety is paramount, a 180-degree beam increases orientation and peripheral vision in the dark. Morpholite flashlights are ideal for investigations in abandoned facilities such as houses and hospitals, factories, caves, and tunnels. Avoid those low-hanging tree branches that poke your eyes in the woods. Visit FNGinnovations.com to see a full line of tactical lights and accessories. That's FNGinnovations.com.
Now you can find all your favorite talk radio shows live, all in one place at TalkStreamLive.com. Listen from anywhere, office, home, or in your car. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com and click on one of the many live talk show hosts you want to listen to. It's free and easy. No computer? Download the smartphone apps. Never miss your favorite talk show. Find them all at TalkStreamLive.com.
Hey everybody, what's up? Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and check this out. The 2015 MUFON Symposium will be held this September 24th through the 27th in beautiful downtown Irvine, California. Expanding ufology, opening new doors in academia, industry, and media. Former Defense Minister of Canada Paul Hellyer will be there in person. Former CNN news anchor Cheryl Jones, TV news journalist Jaime Maussan, and MUFON's chief photo analyst Mark D'Antonio. They're just a few of the growing list of names for the 2015 event. It's September 24th through the 27th at the beautiful Hotel Irvine. Get your tickets today at MUFONSymposium.com. That's MUFONSymposium.com. Go Beckley Tepe.
You want to know a secret? I love ponies. I really love ponies. I'm serious. I couldn't stay sane without ponies to brush.
Why fade to black? Because you never got that pony, damn
This is Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
right, welcome back. Fade to Black, bespoke radio for the masses on the Game Changer Network and KGRA The Planet. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, live from London, England, Andy Thomas. And follow us on Twitter at JChurchRadio. It is on fire right now. Email is jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. Andy, talking about the London bombings, I want you to clear up a couple of things for me here. Some urban legend / myth. The first thing I want to touch upon is guns and gun control in London and the UK. Is it legal to own a gun as a citizen in the United Kingdom?
The answer to that is no, unless you are a sportsman or unless you are a member of the police or the army. But no, you cannot get a license for a firearm just as an everyday citizen. That is categorical. And the only guns that tend to be in circulation are the ones that operate through the criminal networks. But no, there is no question about it. You are not permitted to own a gun unless, as I say, you are a sports person or a member of the authorities. So, that is pretty clear, pretty black and white now.
So if you have a handgun in London and you're seen with a handgun, it's a bad situation.
Yeah, I mean, you can be immediately arrested and indeed tasered or indeed shot if you are seen holding any kind of suspected firearm. I mean, that's led to some slightly questionable miscarriages of justice. For instance, a few years ago, there was a guy carrying a table leg, an antique table leg under a blanket, and people phoned the police thinking it was a shotgun, and he got shot dead. And it was only a table leg. But it does at least go to show, even a suspected firearm visible on the streets, no, you will be taken down pretty quickly.
And video surveillance, the reports are, they're pretty solid. London is the most videoed city in the world. Are you comfortable with that? And is that a true statement?
I believe it is a true statement. Well, it's not just London, although, of course, that's the centre. But I think Britain as a whole has more security cameras in it than any other country in the world. We are the most surveyed nation. And there are a lot of people that think we're kind of being used as a guinea pig state. We're being sort of experimented with as this kind of Orwellian, constantly watched society. But sadly, that is true. Yes, it is true. We've got it worse here than anywhere else in the world.
With this sophisticated system that you have, how come, and you just brought this up with 7/7, how come every time it seems to me, I could be wrong here, that every time you need to depend on that system, there's a problem with it? Again, am I wrong in that statement? But that seems to be the case.
Well, I wouldn't say every time. Clearly, I think that's perhaps a little bit too sweeping. But certainly there have been some big cases where you would have imagined there would be more footage. I mean, with 7/7, for instance, it is often said that, the bombers have all been identified by video cameras, excuse me, and that we know who they are from those images. Well, in fact, as far as I'm aware, there is only one who can be definitively identified from those images. And indeed, one of the images, which seems to show the bombers, looks like some rather crude photoshopping has occurred, whereby he is supposedly standing in front of a set of railings, but one of the railings seems to come in front of his body in a very peculiar way, which looks even like that image has actually been manipulated. So if they have got all the clear security footage that they claim they have, we've not been shown it. And yes, this has happened in other instances where, yes, you would expect something was on film, but then mysteriously it isn't. Although I should say that is not peculiar to Britain necessarily, lest we forget when the crash which killed Princess Diana occurred in Paris. It just so happened that the reason that the authorities at least say they could never trace the strange white Fiat that we do know did clip the Mercedes at some point in the underpass during the crash. The reason they said they couldn't find it was because all of the security cameras in that area were off that night and not working. Well, would you believe it?
Yeah,
So
right,
I think it's not just Britain, I'm afraid.
Do you think there has been a downward trend in crime in London because of all of the video surveillance?
This is one of the interesting things. There have been a number of reports over the years and surveys which have said that CCTV or security cameras do not reduce crime.
Right.
What they do, okay, now I think this is true, that they help identify criminals when, it's an everyday kind of criminal act, but they don't seem to discourage it. And I think one of the reasons for that is because we've all actually, and this is a worrying sign, I think, we've all got so used to the idea that we're on film 24/7 wherever we go outside of our houses that we just kind of forget that it's there. So it doesn't seem as such to change anybody's behavior. So, no, that's one of the things. They don't really prevent crime, but they do help at least to identify the perpetrators. But, yeah, some of the claims, well, we need it because it makes us a safer society. Well, it doesn't really. And this is one of the things that's been argued about greatly over the years.
Well, isn't your freedom curbed? In other words, how much of London is every single street and block throughout London under surveillance? I mean, is there any place you can go in London and not see a CCTV camera?
I would certainly say all of the main streets are. I couldn't speak for all of the side streets, but yes, if you're in a main area anywhere, in any major city, not just London, you can assume that you are on camera. Absolutely.
Now, what is different from that than the NSA's surveillance of every single telephone call going on over here that we're in such an uproar over? Isn't it the same type of freedom that you're giving up in London?
Well, I mean, what you've got over there with the NSA, we have the same problem because Edward Snowden revealed that your authorities are working with ours. We've got a place called GCHQ over here that's doing pretty much what you're getting over there. So, yes, it turns out that we are at least potentially all under surveillance, which you might have kind of guessed, I suppose, but it's not comfortable to know it, that every call, every email is potentially monitored and they don't ask anybody's permission. Now, they haven't got the time to be checking every single person's individual stuff. But certainly keywords are sought for in emails and the social media without any question. And Edward Snowden told the world this. And the fact that it hasn't been denied, I think, I thought that was a very good sort of backing up of the conspiracy theory world, really, that all the things they'd feared for so long, which people said was paranoia. Well, it turns out it was true. And now everybody's shrugged and, oh, well, never mind. So nobody gives any credit to the conspiracy world, even though it turns out we kind of got it right. But yeah, it's a problem. I mean, you can now assume that the Orwellian state has arrived. And what's happening over here at the moment is that legislation is they're attempting to push it through, which will make that even easier for them. So yes, they could probably do it anyway, but we had a government that was a coalition government until recently over here with a party called the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives. But at the last election, the Liberal Democrats, who were more for freedom and far less surveillance, they were effectively knocked out. So we now have a much more right-wing government that is now pushing through a lot of the control measures through law that it wants. And a lot of people are very uncomfortable about it, but because they have a majority in the House of Parliament, of course, nobody can stop them now. So, yes, I'm afraid it's getting worse and not better.
Well, with all of the video surveillance over there, if something happened, well, something did with 7/7, but something else, an assassination attempt or something, you would have all of that, presumably all of that evidence there. When we look over here at Dealey Plaza and John F. Kennedy, we're very limited on what we have here. We didn't have that video surveillance, and everything that we do have is disappeared. And that is fed into the conspiracy over here with JFK. And I'm afraid that the two are related if you think about it, because we don't have the evidence with JFK. We only have what we are told. And with JFK now, looking back 50 years, just came off of the anniversary, are we, what is the truth? Do we stay with Oswald and the single shooter theory, or is there something that hasn't been presented and that we're completely mizzled by?
I mean, in my book, Conspiracies, I obviously spend quite a lot of time looking at the JFK situation because it's still something which sticks in people's minds to this day. And it's still something that's never been resolved. I mean, what I think is quite interesting, and a lot of people miss this, is that the American state itself actually has officially acknowledged that there probably were other gunmen because, of course, after the initial shooting, you had the Warren Commission, which came up with the lone gunman theory. It concluded that it was only Oswald, there was nobody else. That was widely criticized because there were many aspects that it didn't look at. And it did get reinvestigated in 1979, and then there was a new report which came out, an official report on the assassinations. Now, that did accept that there probably was a wider conspiracy. But note that word probably. It enabled them to say, well, and we're not going to investigate any further. But there you go. But there is therefore an acknowledgement that the lone gunman theory is not accepted even by people in power. But what they did was they published the report in 1979 and then just sort of pushed it under the carpet and hoped everybody would forget, which most people do. But it's worth noting that the official view is that it was probably a wider conspiracy.
Well, was Kennedy in that kind of hot water from so many different directions? You had the ties with Mexico, with Nixon, Cuba, the mafia, UFOs, the CIA, the Soviet Union. Was he in that? Did he have that many people that were interested in seeing him die?
Well, it would seem so, wouldn't it, really? I mean, he certainly was not a man to do what other people wanted him to do. And I don't think that, of course, made him terribly popular with certain, groups. I mean, if you want to simplify it, I mean, one view is, the New World Order, which comprises many different factions and many different things, basically were not comfortable with where he was going with his policies and the way he was running things. And it would seem, wasn't going along with what a president would normally be expected to. So, I mean, it's a bit like Princess Diana. Sorry to keep coming back to that. But again, there are a lot of possible people that would have wanted to have seen her gone. They were almost queuing up to want to get rid of her by the end. And I think that was true for JFK. But I mean, the question you have to ask is, if there was more than one gunman, well, then, of course, that is not one lone madman. That is a coup d'etat. And the general view, I think, today of most people that look at the Kennedy situation was that it was a coup. And effectively, the nation was never the same after that. Certainly, it sent a message to any president that might try to go their own sweet way a little bit too much in future that maybe they ought to toe the line from there on. And, I mean, the evidence has to, of course, be looked at. And there's a lot of evidence that there were other shooters. You've got the famous grassy knoll, which is a raised area above Dealey Plaza, where several people claimed they heard shots coming from over the wall. We should also note, too, that the police dicta belt recordings, some of the police motorcyclists, they had audio recorders in their belts, and some of the analysis says that at least 6 shots were recorded by some of those machines. Now, of course, others say, well, it could have been echoes, it might, and so on. But it seems to me from the analysis that it's pretty reliable that certainly there were more shots fired than Oswald could have released all in one flurry, which is, of course, one of the central arguments. Could his bullets have done all the damage that they did? And the general view is that they couldn't. I mean, interestingly, over here, and I'm sure you've heard this theory over there too, but for the anniversary of Kennedy's death, for the 50th anniversary, there was a television program which said, okay, there was another shot from another source. But what they said was that it was a security guard's gun that had accidentally gone off in the middle of all the chaos when Oswald started shooting. Now, I mean, of course, again, on one level, that seems like a good solution, but it's not a conspiracy. They said it was an accident. The only conspiracy there was they tried to cover that up. But it didn't address so many of the other issues. It didn't address the shots heard from the grassy knoll area. It didn't address any of the weirdness around Jack Ruby. Because we should, of course, remember that Oswald was then himself shot dead by the nightclub owner Jack Ruby, who it turns out later on knew Oswald. And Rose Sharami, who was one of the strippers that worked in Ruby's rather sleazy nightclub, now she claims that she had overheard Ruby and Oswald and men that she believed to be potentially CIA officers discussing the assassination that would occur the day after. So this was the night before the shooting. And she did actually go to the police and told them what she had heard. And she was not believed. So that's quite an interesting story. And the fact that after the shooting, a little while later, Rose Sharami was herself found dead by the side of a road does make you think that they were getting rid of a key witness there. So, you know, there is so much weirdness surrounding the whole situation. And other people like E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis, people with mafia and CIA connections, have said there absolutely was an attempt to take out the president. But of course, when they have said this, they then have not been believed because the state doesn't want anybody to believe them. And again, it comes back to that point of knowing who to believe. But I think there's certainly more than enough evidence that, you know, the lone gunman theory, which has become like a joke, isn't it? The lone gunman theory now, it clearly is not good enough. It does not explain everything. And whichever way you look at it, there was a wider story going on that day, which had, of course, huge implications many years later. And, of course, we should also say here, some say that Watergate, which ostensibly just looked like a bit of political espionage gone wrong. There are claims that what they were trying to retrieve from the Watergate office buildings were in fact incriminating photographs that would have shown CIA involvement in the shooting of JFK. Now, that was a claim that has been made by people like E. Howard Hunt, but again, it doesn't seem to go mainstream. It gets ignored. So there's a lot of evidence out there that probably ought to be looked at, but of course conveniently isn't.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you right now, Richard Nixon. Nixon was,
indeed, yes.
Yeah, Nixon, we just lose sight of who he was through the Eisenhower administration, all the way up, and his playing in the background all the way up through Watergate and the JFK assassination, and his connections to the CIA, and just crazy stuff that he was involved with all around the world, with Cuba, Mexico City, bank transfers, money, that the people that he was talking to, and he. And all of those guys are tied into Dallas, Texas. It's absolutely nuts that he has been ignored. And then you have the Allen Dulles, of course, connection with Nixon too as well, playing out through this entire scenario, and Nixon's run from 1958 to 1972, 1973. So,
some of the Watergate tapes, which of course were the tapes that were made secretly in the White House, which were then used against Nixon himself. It is claimed that some of the conversations on there, had they made it all the way through to the end, because some key moments, would you believe, again, got accidentally wiped by Nixon's secretary. It is said that on there were conversations where Nixon would use phrases like that Bay of Pigs thing, which seems to be a coded reference, in fact, to the shooting of JFK, because he's not referring actually to the Bay of Pigs incident, but it seems to be a code word for, you know, him knowing a lot more about the killing of JFK than has ever been admitted. But, of course, with those crucial moments then wiped from the tapes, all that anybody was able to do was to show that Nixon had covered up knowledge of the Watergate burglary, but no more, which is, of course, how that all then in itself got swept under the carpet.
Well, we keep making references, and I do all the time on this show, and I always ask the same question, but the New World Order, what is your definition of the NWO?
Well, we mentioned briefly sort of early on in this conversation, I mean, there's some interesting letters which fly back and forth across the Atlantic in, I think, around 1909, and in which you get people like Arthur Balfour, who would soon become one of our prime ministers here, writing to Theodore Roosevelt, who was at that point your president, cousin, of course, to the later Roosevelt. And Balfour basically says, look, I recognize that our empire is on the wane, you're doing pretty well, but together we could be powerful. And he essentially says, our navies could police the world, we need to get together. And it does seem from the events that then start to build from there that was a suggestion that was accepted. And then you get sort of people like H.G. Wells writing a book about the New World Order, Bertrand Russell, the famous, philosopher. He's very open in how it should work. It's not a secret. And you get lots of politicians over the years constantly boasting of creating the New World Order. And then you can find many references to it in official documents, in speeches. It's in plain sight. So I always find it very strange. When people say to me, oh, well, New World Order, that's paranoia, you say, well, it isn't, because you can trace its origins, and its purpose clearly is to create a Western hegemony which basically governs the world, or at least as much of the Western world as possible. It would seem that the Soviets and the Chinese are not part of that in the years when they were around as the Soviets, and they're still not part of it today. They've probably got their own plans, but it does seem to be very firmly a Western ideal. But, of course, after World War II, there's lots of conspiracy theories about that too, Britain is much weakened by World War II. We're very much now in economic thrall to America, and it's largely seen that that's the moment where the torch of the New World Order gets firmly passed from Britain to America, and that, the essential aim of uniting as much of the world as possible into the hands of a very few people with an awful lot of power in the West seems to be being adhered to by the day. And hence, of course, you then have to create the mandates that you need to get your way. Hence, wars need to be engineered, terrorist atrocities, you can engineer the economy to get the crises that you need to, as Noam Chomsky has said, manufacture a consent. The public needs to be brought on side, at least enough that it can let them do what they've got to do. And I think anybody that says a New World Order isn't real, it just isn't looking at the evidence. It's there, it's in plain sight. It's not even denied. And it seems to me that okay, you might argue that it's too easy just to say that any strange thing that happens in the world is New World Order. But there are certainly certain political events, certain moves to do with warfare in the Middle East especially, where you do have to see the signs that this is part of the bigger plan. And certainly there are plans, and they don't always go right. I'm not one of those people that think that the New World Order is all powerful, because I think it makes some pretty bad mistakes, but it likes to think that it will be one day. And it's certainly a blueprint that it works to. Whether it always works in the way it should is another matter, but we have to be aware of it, because I think it is very real.
We had Kennedy step up and mention, secret societies and secret handshakes. And he goes very public, and he's very negative. Well, yeah, negative is the right word, but he wanted to avoid and make us aware of that, and that he was going to have no part of it. And he winds up dead.
Well, yes, which of course speaks volumes. And once again, to draw a parallel, Princess Diana, in some of her later interviews, of course, made very threatening remarks about revealing the truth about the dark forces running the royal family and running Britain. And she alluded to something similar there. And, of course, she didn't come off very well for it either. So, yes, I think there are people who try to reveal the truth of the way things are run. But if they go too public, if they're too high profile, they're too dangerous. I mean, people like yourself and myself, we can be written off as nut jobs,
Yep.
We don't have to be taken seriously. They don't really need to worry about us. But if somebody in a high position starts saying this, that's, of course, very undermining for them. And they are often the people that have to be concerned, I think, for their welfare, which is probably why more people don't go public for obvious reasons.
Have you ever have you been threatened? Anything strange? Phone taps, people outside your house, anybody whisper in your ear to keep your mouth shut?
Well, I mean, listen, we've seen with Edward Snowden, they must monitor people like ourselves. They'd be stupid not to. But again, I don't particularly see what threat we could be to them. Like what we're talking about here, it's all out there in the open already. This is available information. What we're trying to do here is focus it to give it some context and make some sense of it. We're not coming out with stuff that we have necessarily only seen with our eyes that could undermine the world's image of itself. So, it's the people that do that, like some of the 9/11 witnesses, people like Barry Jennings, who had a lot of interesting stuff to say about what was going on in Building 7, for instance. Now, he dies of a mysterious illness quite early on. There are other witnesses that seem to be disappearing in strange circumstances. These are the people they have to take out. My look at it is this. No, I'm not aware of, other than the fact somebody might be reading emails and that, I'm certainly not aware that anybody has ever shown any interest in me. I will not live my life like that. That's where you go down the road of paranoia.
Right.
And you think that you're being filmed all the time. Well, you are in the streets, but, and there's people listening in. Well, hey, there's nothing that I would not say publicly. The information that I try to share in the hope of creating a more conscious world, it's in my books. You can read it in bookshops and libraries. It's on the net. It's out there. What are they listening in for? They're not going to hear me saying anything that I wouldn't say publicly. And I just refuse to go down that road. If there are people that would do us harm or who would threaten us, you kind of have to just live your life in the hope that that doesn't happen, because otherwise you go mad. And I have known people who have certainly gone down the road of being very worried that they're under surveillance, that people are going to threaten them. And in the end, they make themselves ill. I'm not giving anybody that pleasure, because if fear is the controlling tool, well, you don't want to give in to it. So, hey, if they want to listen in, and if they're listening in now or doing whatever, they're going to do it anyway. I'm going to put the kettle on, have a nice cup of tea, and get on with my life of sharing important information. If they come and do something nasty to me one day, well, that would be incredibly irritating, but you can't worry about it. You've got to get on and do what's right, because there are too many people throughout history who have fallen prey to threats and then gone quiet, and in the end it's holding back human consciousness. And I think we have to, as much as possible, stay true to our ideals. But I don't think we're very high profile. And also, if they were to start to take out people like ourselves or David Icke or whoever, Alex Jones, it's too obvious, isn't it? Because they know then that 10 million conspiracy theorists will say, oh, well, there you go. It goes to show he was onto something. So they're not going to do that. The people that they tend to get to are the ones who are more public profile. And I have to say, over here at the moment, one of the big stories that's broken in the last year or so is the accusations of paedophilia in very high places, including Parliament.
Yes.
And so far, they're doing a very good job, it would seem, in discrediting the claimed witnesses to the point where nothing ever seems to get to court. They foist it all off onto the entertainment industry.
Jimmy Savile. Yeah.
Yeah, this stuff. So you see what I'm saying? So yes. It's those people that really do know stuff and they've seen stuff. They are the ones that seem to be got to quite quickly. They are the ones that have to worry, I think.
This is Fade to Black. Let's take a quick break. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, live from the UK, Andy Thomas. It's an all-conspiracy evening. We're going to take a quick break. I'm going to get Andy to hang on for a few more minutes because when we come back, we have an election. This is an election year, and we're going to talk about the Bilderbergs and other Illuminati influences on the outcome of the election. We'll be back right after this. Stay with us.
Here, and you are listening to my boy Jimmy Church on JimmyChurchRadio.com.
Despite popular opinion, reading a book will not make you smarter,
but listening to Jimmy Church will.
Attention, all Fader Knots. Studio Dome has a special deal on their SD1 Bluetooth speaker. Just go to JimmyChurchRadio.com, click on their banner, enter the promo code Jimmy, and you get $40 off and free shipping on the SD1. It's voice activated, comes with a USB antenna, cables, and a carry bag. Never listen to your phone, tablet, or laptop speakers ever again. It's the only way to listen to Fade to Black. That's JimmyChurchRadio.com, Studio Dome banner, promo code Jimmy. Go Beckley Teppy.
Erica, Brittany, Gabby, and you're listening to JimmyChurchRadio.com.
It's not a lifestyle we chose. We were born this way. KGRARadio.com.
Hey everybody, what's up? Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and check this out. The 2015 MUFON Symposium will be held this September 24th through the 27th in beautiful downtown Irvine, California. Expanding ufology, opening new doors in academia, industry, and media. Former Defense Minister of Canada Paul Hellyer will be there in person. Former CNN news anchor Cheryl Jones, TV news journalist Jaime Maussan, and MUFON's chief photo analyst Mark D'Antonio. They're just a few of the growing list of names for the 2015 event. It's September 24th through the 27th at the beautiful Hotel Irvine. Get your tickets today at MUFONSymposium.com. That's MUFONSymposium.com. Go Beckley Teppy.
This is KJCR at JimmyChurchRadio.com.
Welcome back to Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Follow us on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Also, email is jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. Tonight, live from the UK, very early in the morning, Andy Thomas is with us. This is an all-conspiracy evening. Andy, I said right before the break, this is an election year. And I want to go back, and before anybody says, Jimmy, no. I want to back up to when Obama and Hillary were up against each other 8 years ago. And Hillary was the front runner. Everything was cool. Everything that's where things were headed. And then Obama disappears from his plane. The press corps is left, held hostage, by the way. They're diverted, and they're then notified, oh, Obama's not with us. Well, where is he? Well, he's doing something. You know, he goes into a meeting, meets with a very secret society, leaves the meeting, and now he is the Democratic choice. For the Democratic Party, and Hillary is left in the lurch. As a matter of fact, we expected Hillary to be his running mate. It would have been a shoo-in, it seemed. And he walks away with Joe Biden, and everybody was scratching their head on that. Was Obama, is this the truest conspiracy of them all? Was he told, hey, you're going to be the guy?
I mean, I think the notion that real democracy might play any part in the selection of anybody in these worlds is, I think, a forlorn dream. Yeah, I'm absolutely certain that basically people are put into the positions that the higher powers want them to be in. I mean, whoever is president, they are not the final word. And I mean, certainly if you look at any presidency, it's always worth looking at the guys in the back who generally hold actually more power, but obviously are not quite so prominent. And I mean, in Obama's case, he was certainly groomed for power by people like Zbigniew Brzezinski. But Brzezinski is a very powerful figure. He's written books that effectively lay out the New World Order plan, and he's open about it. And Brzezinski, of course, was also one of those who helped to create Al-Qaeda, because he went over to Afghanistan in the late 1970s, early 80s, and took the Mujahideen, who were fighting the then Soviet invaders of Afghanistan, and armed them. And it was those groups that would, of course, eventually become Al-Qaeda, and you could then argue ISIS. So, in other words, this guy is one of the main sponsors of Obama. Brzezinski had been responsible for a lot of creating the way that the modern world is. And if Obama's got Brzezinski on his side, well, who's going to argue with Brzezinski? And it's not just him. There are other figures in the background, probably with great power too. And at the end of the day, you do get the idea that in America, and I can only say this from a viewpoint we get from here, it's either money that speaks in politics above anything, and that's partially true here, but I think not quite so true, or, the puppetry that goes on is making absolutely sure that the best New World Order candidate will be inserted to win. And it does seem from the example that you give there, indeed, that Hillary, it was decided, was not the one, was certainly not at that stage. And thus we've had what we've had since.
And here we are going, what seems to me, and this isn't a political show, I try to avoid it like the plague. But what this is a conspiracy show. And I look at everybody that's running right now on both sides, and what I see doesn't make sense. I am sure there is something going on. Do you think Trump has been chosen? Do you think he's been anointed? I don't think his money can put him in his position that he is in. Mass media is helping him sit in his position, which is driven by somebody else, the Rothschilds. And it seems like this is a given right in front of us. Is this a predetermined situation? Is this a conspiracy?
I suppose this comes down to whether we call it a conspiracy or just a very overt manipulation. I mean, again, we have a different experience over here. We see certain things presented to us, what's going on over in your country. And it looks to us, and I can only give that viewpoint, that Donald Trump absolutely is being sort of pushed to the top of the publicity ladder. But of course, the more publicity he gets, the more you get the impression he's in with a chance. Now, I don't know if that's entirely true or whether that's what people believe there. But, I mean, as I recall at the last election with Obama, and I've already forgotten the guy's name. Who was the guy who seemed to be the main rival to Obama in the last presidential election? What was his name?
Oh, the Mormon guy. Yeah, okay, him.
Him. Now, over here, in our media, the impression was given that he was almost a dead cert to win the election, or that it was very close, neck and neck, and, Obama wasn't a certain win at all for a second term. But then the election happens, and Obama carries it actually very easily. And you realize that all the talk of the other guy even having a chance was just rubbish. It was nonsense. And yet we were manipulated to think he was in with a chance. Now, what's going on there? Was that to make more people vote for Obama? Or was that just a false impression that was given around the world, whereas in fact Obama was always a shoo-in to get a second term and the other guy never stood a chance? This is the problem, and I'm not sure if that's not the case with Trump. Is Trump being given the appearance of somebody who is a serious threat, who will then just crumble away when it comes to it, or what? I mean, part of me hopes so, because, I think a lot of people have fears around Donald Trump because he is not a man of subtlety. I think we can say this, and I'm not saying he's wrong about everything, but he's certainly, to give that much power to somebody who seems to be so black and white in his thinking, is certainly over here, our perception is a worrying thought. So, there are other candidates there who might suddenly rise up, but it's a very difficult one to call as to which way it's going to go. And if it is all manipulated, well, it doesn't matter who you vote for, does it? The right New World Order candidate will win.
Well, you have the New World Order, to me, and I'm sure you'll agree, it's all driven by money. And if it's driven by money, then you have the Rothschild family running all of the main banks on every single continent. And that's where the decision is made. What better than to have a non-politician in play that is a money guy to bring in more trade, I'm guessing here, through China, through Russia, Africa, South America, Europe, start propping this up and have a guy represent the banking system that is a guy that's a bank in himself, that is used to dealing with those parties. Kind of makes sense to bring in a politician, not bring in a politician this time around and bring in a money guy.
Sure. Well, if nothing else, you get some very nice golf courses around the world.
Sure. Yeah.
But I mean, what I would say also, though, is that yes, you're absolutely right. Money is, of course, a huge factor. But of course, in the New World Order philosophy, I think there is more to it than that, because there is almost certainly, I think, an occult agenda running under the surface too. And I think there is a philosophy of power, not just the money, which also drives the New World Order agenda. And we shouldn't underestimate that. So it might also come down to whether the people manipulating this think that Trump can also play that game. Because just having a lot of money is not entirely the answer to manipulating the world. You also have to have a certain amount of, a little bit of subtlety, a little bit of intelligence. And, okay, you could say at this stage George W. Bush. But even he, I think, it was not quite so stupid as he sometimes gave the impression of being. I think he saw also the wider agenda that was going on. And certainly by the end of his term of office, he did, even if he didn't when it started. I think we need to look very carefully here at how the pieces are put into place. And certainly from this side of the water, we can't call it. You've got a much clearer idea what's going on. And certainly last time we got a very, very one-sided version of what was going on in our media, and it did not present it accurately. So it is very hard to tell from here.
Today, the Pope arrived in the United States from Cuba, speaking to the president directly at the White House. He's joint Congress, which has never happened before. He's going to speak. Then off to New York, Mass at Madison Square Garden, and of course, speaking to the UN General Assembly. The conspiracies around this are all over the net. It's the end of the world, September 23rd, tomorrow. He's going to disclose the Day of Atonement and the rapture, and tie that in with a UFO meteor. I mean, it's crazy. It's all over the place.
Sure.
What do you think the Pope is here to actually do? There hasn't been an agenda laid out. It seems to be very secretive. I don't understand. We may roll around Friday. The end of the world's not going to happen. Andy, you and I will exchange emails on Friday, and it's all going to be good. Or a crap storm is about to happen. What do you think the agenda is?
I mean, obviously, we should bear in mind here that the Pope is a Catholic and therefore has certain beliefs, although technically the rapture is not a Catholic belief. So I'd be very surprised if he were to come out and say anything publicly about that, because that is not part of Catholic doctrine, and I speak as somebody that was brought up originally as a Catholic.
Right.
So I doubt that he would come out with something like that. But, I mean, certainly various popes over the years have certainly held more more secrets than they've ever let on. I mean, our now retired Pope, Pope Benedict, who we now have the oddity of having a retired Pope, when he was Cardinal Ratzinger, lest we forget, was kind of the main defender of the faith, if you wish. He investigated miracles around the world, and one of the miracles he investigated, and I write about this at length in the book The Truth Agenda, because I think this is deserving of more attention, were the Fatima apparitions in Portugal in 1917. Now, many people, thousands of people, witnessed a spinning orb flying around the sky. Was it divine? Was it a UFO? Some say the latter, but something happened. And the information that was given to the three children who were at the core of all these sightings, the third part of the secrets that they had was kept secret for many years. And it was Pope Benedict, who had dropped very heavy hints when he was still just a cardinal, that the third secret of Fatima was all about a huge world change, a massive event that was going to change the world. But then, when he became Pope, he suddenly zipped his mouth out and wouldn't say anything more about it. So could it be that suddenly these secrets have been passed on to Pope Francis and he's suddenly going to say something about this? But it's an odd thing that having built up when he was Cardinal Ratzinger, with all of these kind of hints about what this all meant, and then suddenly to go quiet once he became Pope, it seems strange. But could it be that, yes, maybe the new Pope will say something, or say nothing at all, and it's all just internet hysteria? It's certainly, I mean, I am aware of this. Interesting, though, that, of course, this is not such a big story over here. And obviously in America it's going to be a bigger story. But the various sort of more paranoid views of what this might mean, it's not that strong here. So it'll be interesting. If it is the end of the world coming up, then obviously that would be quite a big announcement, wouldn't it? But I get the feeling it would be transmitted somewhere more subtly than that. But absolutely, I think popes especially, they do believe in the supernatural, they do believe in prophecies, and I suspect that the current pope, absolutely is sitting on knowledge which has been gathered over the years from various paranormal events, if you want to call them that, which maybe should be shared in due course, and maybe that will be the case. Well, we'll see, won't we? Very interesting.
Well, the third secret of Fatima, by the way, there's different versions of it that have been leaked.
Oh, yeah, sure, because, well, I mean, they tried to say that it was, in fact, just a vision of the assassination of John Paul II in 1981. That was one of the versions the Vatican gave, but nobody really believes that. We should say also that the visions, which largely been related by Sister Lucia, who was one of the original children, are very, very esoterically written. And you can interpret them in a number of ways. It's very much using kind of religious and symbolism. So, the secrets of Fatima are not black and white. It's not clear. You could take them on a number of levels. And it may well be that even the Vatican's not quite sure which way to take it, but that, say, Pope Benedict had his own take on what he thought it meant. But who knows, maybe he was then told to shut up by the rest of the Vatican staff, But, I mean, Vatican conspiracies, well, there's a whole book in that, isn't there?
There is. Tomorrow night, we have Leo Zagami on tomorrow night.
Yeah, sure.
And so, it's going to be a full-on Vatican conspiracy evening tomorrow. Well, also, we'll know a bit more about what the Pope's agenda is, too, as well. But I just find it, with any Pope, it just seems like there is this veil of secrecy behind them, and they don't really ever say anything. They don't really visit but you know what I mean? There's like this thing behind them, but yet the wealth, how much property is owned, the strength of the religion, it's half of the world. And then you know about the vaults underneath the Vatican, where they have been collecting every single piece of information since the dawn of time. And it's all down there, and they won't let us. And they hide behind that. Well, we don't even know what we have. Well, you know what? Let us go check it out. You know, you have 50 miles of vaults down there of stuff. You know what? Open it up. But as long as that secrecy is there, we're going to write our own story behind it. And that's the problem that I have with it. We have no idea. Andy, tomorrow, he's here. United Nations, White House, Congress, just came out of Cuba. He's landing here, and we don't have any idea what he's here for. It's kind of trippy, isn't it?
For sure. I mean, obviously, popes do this. They visit various countries and whatnot. I mean, just one little addition about Fatima. I went out to Fatima with my wife just a couple of years ago because I was curious to see, the site where all of this supposedly occurred. And there is now a huge shrine there, and there is a huge kind of Catholic sort of conference center. But if you go down into the basement, you've got what looks suspiciously like blast doors, these really thick doors, and so they're hidden chambers, and it all feels really weird down there, almost as if there is some kind of bunker or shelter under it, which I suppose, if they are expecting the Day of Judgment, maybe they are sort of hedging their bets and think they better have somewhere to go if it does all kick off. So, maybe there is some other explanation for it, but a lot of people think absolutely that the church, it'll cover itself in every way. It's got the knowledge hidden away for whatever reason. It's not sharing it, but also that it's got to, be careful, because if they're going to look very stupid if they say the Day of Judgment's coming and it doesn't come, but equally they, in their own belief system, are going to be very misguided if they don't prepare for it and it does come. So they're kind of in a bit of a fix there.
Yes.
I mean, I have to say Pope Francis, he's certainly been on the surface at least a little bit more liberal and a little bit more open than previous popes. So, let's see. It'll be very interesting to see what he's come out and said. He does appear at least to be a humanitarian, perhaps in a way that some previous popes weren't. But whether that's all just on the surface or not, well, we shall see.
Well, before I let you go, one last question, and again, thank you, and I know it's so early in the morning over there, but thank you, is why do we love a good conspiracy? What drives it?
I think human beings are very drawn to mystery, and you know what it's like. If you hide something, suddenly you want to know what it is, even when you weren't interested in it before. But if somebody tries to conceal it from you, you're instantly more interested to know why and what their motivation in concealing it was. So I just think it's a kind of an evolutionary thing that we've all grown up with, that if something is withdrawn from you, you want it more. And when it's absolutely obvious that authorities are trying to, basically hold certain knowledge and information for themselves, and it's blindingly obvious they are, and they're then actively lying about what the nature of that is, of course we all want to know more. This is the instinct, and in the end, that's how things move forward. But at the moment, I think we've got very much polarity. You've got the internet, which has completely opened up conversations in the last 15, 20 years that you could never even have publicly had before, not on this level. That's new. Now, that is a big new thing in the world, and it's also creating, I think, a kind of matrix of new consciousness. But it means that some of the secrets that authorities could have got away with concealing for a long time in the old days, that's just not there anymore. So they've got to fight back either with more denial, which of course doesn't help, you just get more conspiracy theories, but equally they are fighting back with more misinformation and deliberately muddying the waters, putting out theories that actually have no foundation in reality to try to bring the whole lot down. And I think that's one of the things that we're dealing with at the moment. There is such confusion, and I think some of it's deliberately caused. And, as I've said throughout this conversation, I think the only solution to that is for those that can see, absolutely, we're not being told the truth. We've got to try to discern, try to get our sources of evidence as pure as possible, and get repeated sources of evidence as much as possible to make as solid a case as we can, and then try and present that to as many people as we can without shouting at them, without trying to tell them what to believe, but offering it as an alternative truth to that which is fed to us from the media, which very obviously is in itself just part of an establishment cover-up.
Thank you so much, Andy. Great conversation tonight. Have a great, safe, non-conspiracy rest of your day.
Thank you.
Man, I'm watching the studio clock. We ran it up to the bloody end once again. Thank you, Andy. Fantastic conversation. Fade to Black's executive producer is Rita Kamarian. Show is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Mark D. Kovar, LJ3, Renee, Mark Dunbar, and Jonas. Announcers are Steve Harder, Gene Vito, and Mark D. Kovar. Fady by Dale. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music by Doug Aldridge. Intro, Spaceboy, spaceboymusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. Syndication is KGRA The Planet. Tomorrow night, Leo Zagami right here live from Rome, Italy. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2015 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network and cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Everybody be safe. Go Beckley Tapping.